Ou voulez toujours été informé sur ce qui a passé en Haïti tant ou à l'étranger? Non, c'est le rendez-vous. Zoom Haïti News à Caribbean Television Network.
Tous les dimanches soirs à 8 h, ne manquez pas l'émission Opinion. En direct sur vos plateformes préférées, retrouvez chaque semaine 4 grandes voix du journalisme. Marc-André Jean de Clarity Times, Enoch Arisma de Référence FM, Emmanuel Paul de Caribbean Television Network et Jean Weekends Méronnet de Telegram 360. Ils passeront en revue les événements marquants de la semaine, avec des analyses pointues et des débats passionnés qui vous feront revivre les moments forts de l'actualité. Soyez au rendez-vous tous les dimanches soirs à 8 h sur Facebook, YouTube, TikTok et X. L'actualité comme vous ne l'avez jamais entendue.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a pleasure to have you with us today. And we are going to keep talking about immigration. And today we have the pleasure to have with us Kristin Marshall. Kristin Marshall, she's an attorney working with Canadian Border Clinic. This is an organization that is helping immigrants in the US and in Canada, giving legal advice. And today we are going to talk with Kristin about the situation like immigrants who are trying to cross the border to go to Canada and what kind of support the organization is giving. Kristin, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks very much, Emmanuel. It is a pleasure to be here in these challenging times. I'm happy to be here to answer your questions and explain what we do.
Tell us about Canada Border Clinic. What kind of service are you provided? What is the organization is doing?
So we are a virtual, completely virtual, pro bono, free legal clinic. We launched in July of last summer, and our mandate is to provide legal information and advice to migrants who are seeking to come to Canada to claim refugee status, and also if they have family members here to give them advice and legal opinions.
Oh, I understand you must be very solicited right now because there are a lot of people trying to cross the border from the US to Canada. How many people you can say like call you receive an average like people soliciting the help of the organization?
You know, that's a good question, Emmanuel. And I know that in the last month, the inquiries to our clinic have they doubled kind of shortly after the election in the United States, and they have doubled again since that time. But it's in the hundreds, and I don't have specific numbers to share.
Canada, they try to implement new measures. I talked to the Canadian authorities for immigration, and they explained there are some new rules they are trying to implement. Unlike in 2017 and beyond, where people can cross the border and ask for asylum, the situation is changing right now. What can you tell us about the new measures that have been implemented by the Canadian authorities?
Well, yes, there's a big change from the time you're talking about in 2016 and 2017, that when people were crossing at the Quebec border at a place called Roxham Road, and this was an unofficial entry point, and that actually almost 2 years ago now, in March 2023, the agreement between Canada and the US, called the Safe Third Country Agreement, was expanded to be all the way across the entire land border. So there were no more unofficial crossing entry points, such as Roxham Road. People were previously able to come into Canada that way to make a refugee claim, and that has been changed.
By changing, so you mean like nobody can cross anymore? If they cross the border, there's a huge likelihood that they might be turned down?
People can come from the United States into Canada to make a refugee claim, but only in particular situations. And so that is what our legal clinic supports people to understand, whether or not they meet an exception to this Safe Third Country Agreement. And so not everybody does meet an exception. Also, we do have legal information on our website, and perhaps you can share that after. This is the Canada-US Border Rights Clinic information for migrants, and these are set out very clearly. But the exceptions to the Safe Third Country Agreement, the most common one is if somebody has a family member in Canada who can serve as what's called an anchor relative. And the types of relatives that qualify as an anchor relative are if they have a spouse, and this includes a common law or same-sex spouse, a parent, a child, a grandparent, a grandchild, a sibling, an aunt, uncle, niece, or nephew. It includes half sisters or half brothers, half siblings, but the list does not include cousins. We have seen many people who have a cousin here in Canada, but that does not qualify as an anchor relative. And also, having a relative in Canada is not the end of the story. It really, what that person's status is, will also determine whether or not they can be an anchor relative. So if they are a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, they can be an anchor relative. If they have been eligible to make a refugee claim in Canada, and if they're over 18, they can be an anchor relative. In other words, a child refugee claimant under 18 cannot serve as an anchor relative. And if someone has been accepted as a convention refugee, they can be an anchor relative, or somebody who's a student or has a work visa here in Canada with a valid permit. All of these categories can qualify as an anchor. So you need that relationship, and then you need that status in Canada as well. Well, there are a few other exceptions too. So that's the most common one is the family member. And we'll talk about this more in a moment. It's the relationship, it's the person's status, and of course, it's really important to prove the relationship. And so that's a service that we also offer, is to scrutinize the birth certificates, the documentation about that relationship, because Canada Border Services Agency really scrutinizes the documents people present about their relationship. Another category that sees a lot of scrutiny is common law relationships. And so if the people have not lived together for the last year, they need to explain their situation, and not every partnership will qualify as a common law relationship, even if they have children. But the other categories of how someone might meet an exception to the Safe Third Country Agreement. So there's another exception if an unaccompanied minor. So if this is a child under 18 who does not have a parent or legal guardian in either country. So they don't have a parent or legal guardian in Canada or the US. This child can come in to Canada to make a refugee claim. If somebody holds a valid Canadian visa and enter Canada and make a refugee claim, a US citizen is not covered by the same country agreement. A stateless person, somebody who isn't recognized as a citizen in another country, they can come in. And there's a rare exception if somebody is facing the death penalty and can prove this. That also is an exception because Canada doesn't support the death penalty. And this can be because somebody faces, that type of criminal sentence, or it could be because their country punishes something, say, like a same-sex relationship, with the death penalty. So it isn't often used, but you can understand where it might be used.
Could you clarify the Canadian common law? What kind of relationship is that for people who don't know about it?
Right. So a common law relationship is somebody who has lived with their partner for at least a year previously. And this would have to be documented. Sometimes it's like a joint bank account or it's a joint lease. They also will ask both people questions to kind of try to confirm the nature of the relationship. So this is something that really takes preparation in advance, and that is what our clinic offers. It is so important to get help, in gathering your documents before an approach to the border, because the consequences of coming to the border and being refused entry, Canada Border Services Agency will issue people something called an exclusion order. And this is a type of removal order from Canada that basically takes place immediately. The people are sent back to the US kind of that same day, and clearly they can face separation from family, but they can be at risk of detention in the United States. And ultimately, these days, possible return back to their country. So we can't emphasize enough the importance of, visiting our website to get an understanding of whether or not they meet an exception, and then contacting us for a consultation if they think they do meet one.
I assume you got a lot of solicitation, people who don't meet those requirements. So what is the organization doing with those people? Do they refer to other organizations or just turn them down?
Well, unfortunately, you're right. We don't have the capacity to meet with people who don't meet an exception and to talk about other pathways to immigration to Canada. I mean, there is the Government of Canada website. There are other private lawyers and websites that give information about other immigration pathways. But we don't provide that service. It's outside of our mandate and how we can help.
So what could happen? I asked you the question, I think you answered, but I would like people who are listening or watching to understand better. So
Okay.
someone would not meet any of these requirements. They didn't go to any of the organization, but they just trying to cross the border out of desperation to go to Canada. Is there any remote possibility that they might be accepted without having those relationship? Anyone in Canada?
No, it really, I think Canada Border Services Agency is quite strict in the application of the exceptions to the Safe Third Country Agreement. And even in situations where we believe somebody does meet an exception, if CBSA is not satisfied with their documents, they sometimes turn them away anyway. So, we do not recommend people take their chances to go to the border and hope to find a sympathetic official. They are very strict in their application of this agreement.
Is there your organization also help work with other organization? Because I remember a couple months ago we were in Buffalo where someone was trying to cross the border like via Vive Legal and they were giving some help. Do you have like open checking all the person meet the requirements and there's an inquiry? Do you work with other organization that you refer them?
Yes, absolutely. We are part of a Canada-US border network. We are not qualified to practice US law, for example. So if somebody has a question about this in this or legal consequences in the States, we have to rely on partners and others as part of this network. And they do make referrals to us. And the network is both legal professionals and also immigrant serving organizations. And we're quite reliant on each other for kind of breaking news too, and for help and referrals. Well, in some port of entry, there is one port of entry at the Peace Bridge where people actually write ahead to request an appointment. Most of the other port of entries don't take appointments and people just come when they can. And there is a newcomer center that also assists at that Peace Bridge port of entry. But the point is, you don't have to make an appointment before you come to the border, but you really should get legal advice about your situation, whether you meet an exception to the Safe Third Country Agreement and how your documents look. Maybe there's something you need to apply for and get a copy of that birth certificate that confirms your relationship with your uncle in Canada, for example. So we can help with that assessment and recommendation so people can make their own choices, but to feel confident in approaching.
What countries can you say that you have more citizens like soliciting your help? I know there are a lot of Haitians, but also there are people from other countries trying to cross the border. Do you have an idea the rate per country?
Yes, as you say, for sure, we have seen many people from Haiti, people from Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, Afghanistan. We have even had inquiries from American citizens who are transgendered or gender diverse, and they are concerned for their safety in that country. That is the truth. We do not have the capacity to advise US citizens either, because as I mentioned to you, they do not, the Safe Third Country Agreement does not apply to US citizens, but we give them legal information just about the Convention refugee definition and other service providers that might be able to help.
Have you witnessed an increase, like dramatic increase in the number of people soliciting your help within the last couple months?
Very much. Certainly in the last 3 weeks since inauguration. Very much, yes.
Well, your organization is doing such an important job, but how do you sustain how do you stay alive to keep the organization afloat, to serve the people? How is that? Do you receive donation or people can go online to, if they would like to make a contribution to the organization?
We do receive donations, absolutely, on our website, and we are grateful. We have had different donations that, for example, help us with translations. As you can imagine, it's very important. We need to connect with clients speaking a variety of languages. And so some people have dedicated donations to that end. Happily, we have also received more funding from a foundation to hire a second lawyer. And so in April, we will be expanding our service. And we are very reliant on some wonderful law students who volunteer their time and or are doing placements with us. And we have a social work student too. So we have a small but mighty team, I say. Yeah.
Do you have an idea if there's a cap about the number of people the Canadian government can accept on a daily or monthly basis, people who want to make a refugee claim in Canada?
I don't think that I think it's also a matter of personnel power at the border that I don't think they have a number that they say, after 100 migrants seeking entry to Canada, we stop. But I imagine with the increased demand we're seeing that there is more people approaching the border. And so what this means is that there will likely be greater delays. And I have already, even before this increase in attention on the border, I've seen people who are at the border for more than 24 hours. And so we always advise people, especially if they're coming with children, is to bring food, to bring water, and to come early so that they can hope to be processed by the end of the day. I think, there are different arrangements that CBSA can do, but it includes a lot of waiting, and it's not very comfortable. So people should be prepared for that as well.
Well, what can you say to people who might say they know the border is very huge, there's no security at all the points, so they don't meet the requirements, they don't have any family member, but they're trying anyway where there might not be a lot of like Canadian border agents, so they are trying to take a chance. What can you tell? I know you cannot encourage people to do that, but
Yeah.
what are the risks of being caught if for someone who use this pathway?
I can't recommend that. It is very challenging, and I think it's especially in winter quite dangerous. And there is clearly increased surveillance is being announced by the government to monitor unofficial crossings. But if somebody is apprehended, they will also be kind of investigated and issued an exclusion order, which would put them back into the States, where detention is a possibility.
You mentioned you get help for other languages. Like what are, I know we're going to share the website with people who are watching. What are the languages that you need help with, and how can someone contact the organization in case they might want to help in any way whatsoever?
Oh, well, we have a email. It's info@canadaborderclinic.org, O-R-G. We do have some volunteer interpreters that we offer training to, but we have an organization that we hire to provide interpretation when it's a language we don't have. We do have some staff and students who speak Spanish, and we are working on our French, but we don't offer that capability right now. We are looking to put translations of our legal information on the website soon in additional languages too.
So say that someone contact the organization, they would like to have some help to cross the border. How long do you think it might take the whole process to be qualified? By qualify, I mean verify all the paperwork are okay, the relationship are established?
Right. That's a great question, Emmanuel. And it used to be if somebody contacted us on a Monday, we might be able to see them that week or, by the next Monday. It also depends. Now we are having a delay given the demand that it could be a couple of weeks before all of their documentation is collected, looked at, and then they can meet with a lawyer. So unfortunately, the response times have extended given the increased demands, but, gathering their documentation and sharing as much as they can up front will help it be more smooth. But I think we'd be looking at a couple of weeks at this point
Is
for.
it also depend on the so-called sponsor the person has in Canada, because they might have to send some document as well, like how long they take to provide those documents?
Yes, absolutely. We need to look at the documentation of the anchor relative and the family member who wants to cross. We also highly recommend, and this is part of our advice, is that the anchor relative should be at the border when their family member is planning to cross, because Canada Border Services Agency is supposed to speak to that person if they have any doubts or concerns about the identification. And it's just always good to be there to confirm and verify the relationship and to be available if CBSA has questions.
Do you know about any financial criteria, either for the anchor relative or the person who is trying to cross? Is there they need to have a certain amount of money when they went to Canada? Is there any cap, like how much money they need to have or not to have, or in order to be eligible for the service or to get entry to Canada?
Yeah, good question. And we've encountered that question before. The anchor relative is not in any way a sponsor. They are not legally responsible to provide support or care, and they don't need to demonstrate a certain income. I mean, I find the familial family members are very supportive and housing and, feeding and looking after their loved ones, but that is not an obligation. That is not, the investigation is strictly on the family relationship and the status of the anchor relative, but nothing financial.
Could you quickly, you might already answer the question, but I want to emphasize on it. A list of documents. Say that I would like to go right now. I have a brother in Canada or a family member, and then contact the organization. On what are a list like of the document that I would need to send in order to be accepted, at least for the organization to start looking at the document?
So you would need a copy of your like passport. You would need a copy of your birth certificate. Depending if it's your mother, then you want to make sure that we would have her passport if she's a citizen, or her permanent resident card if she is a permanent resident. If your mother is a refugee claimant, then there is a document called it's known unofficially as a brown paper, but it's the Refugee Claimant Protection Document. And this is the piece of paper with a photo that shows that somebody has been found eligible to make a refugee claim in Canada. So we would need to see that to confirm. We want to be sure that this person can be a anchor relative. If somebody's refugee claim has been denied, they cannot serve as an anchor relative. If they are applying for something called a pre-removal risk assessment, that also cannot be an anchor relative. And if they are appealing a negative refugee board decision to the Refugee Appeal Division, that also does not qualify as an anchor. If one of those appeals or applications is accepted, then they can be an anchor.
So if they are asylum seeker and the case is not clear yet in Canada, they be an anchor as well? Is that what you're saying?
They can be an anchor if they're waiting for the refugee hearing. Just being an eligible refugee claimant is good to be an anchor. Another important question is, has the person made a refugee claim in the United States? So that would be documentation we would want to see. What type of interaction has this person had with the US Immigration Service? And have they made a refugee claim? Have they had some other status that enables them to stay in the United States temporarily? We understand that there is concern these days that temporary protected status that was once given may be vulnerable right now under this new administration. And so we would want to take a look at their US paperwork, and whatever we don't understand because we are not practicing in the US, we can count on other partners we have to help advise.
So say that someone crossed the border from Mexico to the US in the south, they did not get caught, they didn't have any legal document from the US, and they are trying to seek refuge in Canada. Would that person be qualified, even if they have they meet all the other requirements?
So they don't have any documentation to talk about their time in the States, but they are in the States. Is that what you mean?
Yes, so they are in the US. They cross the border via the US Mexico border, but they don't have anything to prove their status. So they did not ask for asylum in the US. They don't have TPS, they have nothing, but they want to cross to Canada. Would that be a problem for those?
No, they don't. If they manage to be in that situation with no detection in the US and no documents and no refugee claim, then they just need to prove their own identity and their relationship. Canada and the US are part of an information sharing agreement. We call it the Five Eyes. It's Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Most relevant is the United States. So if the person has a file in the US at all, there's a good chance that Canada is going to find out about it. But we've also seen situations where people have asked for asylum in the US, but for some reason, the US agencies didn't have the paperwork, and so they don't share it with Canada. But in the case you describe where somebody has not had any interaction with the US authorities, that is not a problem. It's clear they're coming from the States and they just need to prove who they are and how they meet an exception.
Given the complexity of the situation right now, say someone who has some kind of legal status in the US, like TPS, asylum seeker, so they are not at immediate risk of removal, although the current administration say like everyone is subject to removal. Would you advise those those people to, take the journey to go to Canada if they are not sure they have a family member who can receive them, they are not sure they would be qualified? What would be your advice to someone who has some kind of legal status in the US, but they are afraid, but they don't meet the requirement?
Well, I would not advise somebody who looks at our website and understands the exceptions to the safe third country agreement. I would not advise that they make an approach to the border. Everybody has to make their own decisions based on their circumstances, and I think even differential treatment of temporary protection depending on which country you're from. But if they think they might meet an exception, then our clinic is poised to help them understand whether or not they do. But just approaching the border is dangerous, I think, at this point, because they risk not being admitted to Canada and sent back to the US where there's, I would say, a greater risk of detention these days, unfortunately. Yeah, well, I think what people are interested in hearing more about is other immigration pathways to Canada that are beyond the mandate of our clinic. But there are, government websites that provide this information. There's also a website called Steps to Justice that is a site of Community Legal Education Ontario, and they have information about immigration pathways. I think that really checking in about whether or not you meet an exception, and also just understanding I don't think I can repeat who qualifies, just to make it totally clear that the anchor relative is the spouse, which includes common law and same sex, parent, child, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, half sibling, aunt, uncle, niece, and nephew. It does not include cousins. And in addition to being the relative, they need to be a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, a refugee claimant, 18 or over, or someone in Canada with a valid work or study permit. If somebody has a work permit because they are a refused refugee, that does not qualify as an anchor. I'm talking about other study and work permits that are outside of the refugee system.
Yes, so there are also people who are trying to get visa from the US, like with Canadian visa. I know that's not your help the organization is giving right now, but say someone, they don't have anyone in Canada to, like, they don't meet those requirements, but they are looking for a visa, or they already had the visa and they went to Canada, they overstayed on the visa and then make their claim. Is that another pathway for them they might be able to cross in case they don't meet the other requirements?
A pathway to cross if they are
No, so
in the state.
if they seek to have a visa to go to Canada, so they don't want to cross the border, or they already have the visa, they plan to go to Canada to make a refugee claim. So would that be something possible?
Well, if somebody has a visa to Canada to visit or to study or to work, then yes, they can enter Canada, and then from inside Canada, they can get advice on making a refugee claim.
Is there your organization do legal clinics like on a certain time, do webinar to like, educate people who are trying to, because I guess you cannot answer all the questions. So do you have a certain time you do some webinar to invite people to listen, or where can they go to get those information on the website?
Yes, so we do workshops for kind of service providers, but we are getting ready to do information sessions for migrants, and that is focused exclusively on who meets an exception to the Safe Third Country Agreement, and so we could talk about doing that type of workshop in the future.
Thank you so much, Kristin. It was a pleasure to have you, and I truly appreciate you answer all the questions, even those that I ask more than twice. So I just wanted to make it clear for people who are listening, they know if they are qualified, what should they do before they taking the journey to cross the border to go to Canada. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your help.
Most welcome, Emmanuel, and thank you for your help and your concern. We recognize just the consequences of these attempts, that we want to try and have people make informed choices and decisions before they try such a thing. Okay, thank you.